He had always been the kind of person who woke up before the sun. Most people found mornings peaceful, but for him, they were the most stressful part of the day. The moment he opened his eyes, a list of responsibilities rushed through his mind like a fast-moving river. Emails to send, tasks to finish, deadlines to meet, calls to return. His life had become a cycle of working, eating quickly, sleeping too late, and waking up too early. There was no room for anything else. Not even breathing felt easy anymore. That particular day started the same. He sat at the edge of his bed, rubbing his face with both hands. He felt the same heavy pressure in his chest that had followed him for months. He told himself he was fine. He always said that. But even he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. After grabbing a cup of plain coffee, he left his apartment. He thought the fresh air might help clear his head. But the moment he stepped outside, he felt the noise of the city hit him. Cars honking, people talking loudly on phones, buses pulling up, motorcycles passing by. Everything felt louder than usual. Maybe he was just too tired. Maybe he needed a break, but he had never been good at taking breaks. His office wasn't far. But instead of walking straight there, he slowed down. Something in him wanted a few minutes of silence before dealing with another long day. He made a small turn and walked toward the nearby park. It wasn't big, but it had a bench he liked. It sat under a large tree whose branches hung low, giving a little shade even when the sun was bright. He barely went there anymore, but today it felt like the only place where he could breathe. When he reached the park, he noticed it was quieter than usual. A few people walked their dogs, and a couple of kids played on the swings, but overall, it was peaceful. He sighed quietly, relieved. He sat down on the bench, leaned back, and closed his eyes for a moment. Maybe if he sat there long enough, could pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. But then he felt someone sit on the other end of the bench. He opened his eyes and glanced to the side. A young woman had taken a seat, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the birds in front of them, watching them hop around near the small pond. She looked calm, almost too calm for someone sitting in a busy city. She had a relaxed posture, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing steady. He wondered how someone could look like that at this hour. He turned his head away, trying to ignore her. He wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. He didn't want small talk or random conversations. He wanted silence, and he hoped she wouldn't disturb that. But after a few seconds, she looked his way with a soft smile. "Good morning," she said politely. He nodded, giving a quick, almost automatic response. He didn't smile back. He didn't want her to think he was open to a conversation. He just wanted to be left alone. His mind was full, and he didn't have space for anything or anyone today. She didn't say anything else, though. She simply turned her attention back to the pond. For a moment, he felt relieved. Maybe she was just being kind. Maybe she wasn't the talkative type. That worked perfectly for him. But even as he sat there, trying to calm himself, his thoughts kept pulling him back into the stress of his responsibilities. He wondered how long it would take for things to get better. He wondered if they ever would. Some part of him hoped things would change, but another part believed they wouldn't. He checked his watch. He knew he needed to leave soon if he didn't want to be late. He took a deep breath, sat up straight, and prepared to leave. But as he stood up, the woman spoke again, this time more directly. "Are you in a hurry?" He didn't know why the question bothered him. Maybe because it felt too close to the truth. Maybe because it made him think about how everything in his life felt rushed. He looked at her, unsure why she was asking. "I should get going," he said. Trying to keep his voice neutral, she nodded, still calm. "Of course, everyone is always going somewhere." The way she said it made him pause. It didn't sound like a simple comment. It sounded like she meant something deeper. But he wasn't interested in the meaning behind strangers' words. He took another step, but before he could walk away, she asked something that made him stop completely. "When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" The question hit him like a sudden gust of wind. He turned slowly to look at her. She wasn't staring at him. She wasn't trying to make a point. She was simply watching the water ripple gently in the pond. Her voice hadn't been demanding or confronting. It was soft, almost curious. He didn't know how to respond. He wasn't even sure what she meant at first. But then the meaning became clear. When had he done something for himself? When was the last time he had sat somewhere without thinking about what he needed to do next? When had he done something simply because it made him happy? He couldn't remember. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He felt strangely exposed, like she had seen through him without even looking his way. He wondered why she asked that question. Was it random? Did she ask everyone questions like that? Or did she somehow know he was struggling? He wasn't sure. What do you mean? He asked finally, his voice quieter than before. She shrugged lightly. Just a question, she said. You looked like someone who hasn't rested in a long time. He didn't know whether to feel embarrassed or surprised. Was it really that obvious? Did he look tired to strangers? He rubbed the back of his neck, unsure of what to say next. I guess. It's been a while, he admitted. She gave a small, gentle smile. Most people forget that life isn't only about what we have to do. It's also about what we choose to do. He didn't respond. He wasn't sure how. Her words felt heavy, but comforting at the same time. He hadn't expected to have a conversation that morning, especially not one that made him think about his life differently. He slowly sat back down. Even though he knew he should leave for work, something about her presence made him want to stay a little longer. It wasn't romantic or anything like that. It was simply peaceful. For once, talking to someone didn't feel like an obligation. She glanced at him, but didn't seem surprised that he sat again. She continued watching the pond, giving him space to gather his thoughts. You come here often? He asked, trying to make sense of the situation. Sometimes, she said. Not every day. But when I feel like the world is moving too fast, I come here to slow down. Her answer made him think. The world did feel like it was moving too fast. At least for him. He wondered if other people felt the same way, or if he was the only one who struggled to keep up. Do you live nearby? He asked. She nodded. A short walk away. What about you? He hesitated before answering. Yeah, not too far. She smiled again, but she didn't ask more. She wasn't trying to pry. Her presence felt natural, not forced. He found that strange because he usually felt awkward around people he didn't know. But something about her calmness made him feel safe, like he didn't have to pretend to be okay. He looked at the pond and then at the sky. The sunlight reflected off the water, and for the first time in a long while, he noticed how gentle the morning looked. He wondered why he hadn't seen it before. Maybe he had been too busy looking at his phone. Or maybe he had forgotten how to slow down. Her question repeated in his mind. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? The truth was painful. He didn't remember. What made you ask me that? He asked softly. She took a moment before responding. You seemed tired, not just physically. Tired in a way people try to hide. He looked down at his hands. She wasn't wrong. He had been hiding that feeling for months, maybe even years. He told everyone he was fine because it was easier than explaining the pressure he felt every day. Sorry, she added quickly. I didn't mean to assume too much. No, he said. You're right. There was a brief silence between them. Not uncomfortable silence, but a gentle pause where neither felt the need to rush the moment. He realized how rare that was. Most of the time, people filled silence with unnecessary words, but she didn't. She allowed the moment to breathe. I used to be like that, she said after a while. Always running, always busy. I thought slowing down meant falling behind. But then something happened that made me rethink everything. He glanced at her, curious but unsure if he should ask more. She didn't look troubled. But her tone carried a hint of something deeper. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, he said. She smiled softly. Maybe another time. Today isn't about me. He didn't understand what she meant, but he didn't push. Something told him this woman lived life with more thought than most people. She seemed to see things differently, almost like she looked at the world through a calm, steady lens. While others rushed past without noticing anything, he checked the time again, but this time he didn't panic. He didn't jump up. He didn't feel that sudden pressure in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in a hurry to go anywhere. He took a slow breath. It felt different, lighter, almost peaceful, she said quietly. Sitting still for a few minutes won't ruin your day. He let out a small laugh. Not a loud one, but the kind that arrives without force. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed outside of work obligations or polite conversations. Maybe you're right, he said. I'm not trying to change your life, she added. Just reminding you that you're allowed to rest. Allowed to rest. The word sounded foreign to him. He had grown so used to pushing himself, so used to believing that rest was something earned, it's not something needed. They sat quietly again. A gentle breeze moved through the park, and leaves rustled softly above them. He noticed the smell of fresh grass. He noticed the sound of birds. Small things he usually ignored. He didn't know how long they sat there, but the longer he stayed, the more his mind felt less crowded. Eventually he spoke again. Thank you. For what? She asked for asking that question. She smiled, but she didn't say anything. She didn't make the moment dramatic or emotional. She simply accepted his gratitude, like it was something natural. He realized then that he didn't feel like a stranger sitting next to her. He didn't feel judged or misunderstood. He didn't feel the need to rush. Everything felt balanced in a way he had never experienced before. He wasn't sure what would happen after this moment. He didn't know if he would see her again, or if this was just a brief encounter that would fade into memory. But something inside him had shifted. Something small but powerful. He stood up slowly, feeling calmer than before. She looked up at him, not surprised this time. Heading to work? She asked. Yeah, he said. But I'll walk a little slower today. She smiled softly, and for some reason, that small smile felt like the beginning of something meaningful. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his, but that didn't matter. Something in her simple question had reached a part of him he had forgotten existed as he walked away from the bench. He felt different, lighter, more aware. The world didn't feel as heavy. His steps felt slower, but not lazy. Just intentional. He didn't know it then. But this small moment, a quiet morning in a park with a calm stranger, would become the start of a change he never saw coming. And all because she asked a question he had been avoiding for years. He walked to work that morning. With a slower pace than usual, he didn't rush like he always did. He didn't constantly check his phone or look at the time every few seconds. His mind kept going back to the woman in the park and the question she asked. It wasn't a complicated question, but it carried a weight he couldn't ignore. It felt like a quiet knock on a door inside him that he had kept shut for too long when he reached the office building. He paused at the entrance. People pushed through the doors as usual, moving quickly, talking loudly, already wrapped up in the rush of the day. He stood for a moment, letting them pass. Normally he would slip into the flow and move with them, but today he just watched. Was he like that? Always rushing, always tense, always barely breathing. He walked inside and found his desk. He turned on his laptop, but his mind wasn't on the work in front of him. His thoughts kept returning to the bench in the park, to the calmness in the woman's voice, to her stillness. She had a quiet strength he couldn't describe. She spoke in a way that made everything sound gentle and meaningful. He tried to work. But after a while he realized he had read the same line on his screen 5 times without actually processing it. His focus kept slipping. His mind was somewhere else. By lunchtime he felt restless. The stress wasn't as heavy as usual, but there was a strange feeling in his chest, a mix of curiosity and confusion. He didn't know why a single question from a stranger had affected him so deeply. He barely knew her. He didn't even know her name, where she worked, or who she really was. Yet something about her seemed familiar, like he had met someone from an older version of himself, someone he had forgotten. When lunch break arrived, he didn't join his coworkers. He usually ate with them, mostly to avoid questions about why he didn't. But today he just wanted to be alone. He walked out of the building and headed toward the same park. He wasn't expecting to see her again. Not really. People came and went, and she might have been there only for that morning. Still, he found himself walking in that direction without thinking much about it. The park was quieter than in the morning. A few older people sat on benches. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing loudly. A man was jogging, listening to music. The swing set was empty now. The kids must have returned home or gone to school. He went straight to the same bench under the tree. When he saw that she wasn't there, he felt a small disappointment he didn't expect. It wasn't because he needed to talk to her again. It was more like he had hoped to understand why the moment stayed in his mind all day. He sat down and leaned back, looking at the pond. Birds floated gently on the water. Leaves rustled above him. The breeze carried a calm scent of grass and tree bark. For the first time in months, he noticed the sound of wind moving through branches. It almost felt like the environment itself was breathing slowly. He stayed like that for a few minutes, just sitting, not rushing anywhere, not thinking about deadlines or duties, and it surprised him how unusual that felt. Silence wasn't something he was used to. It made him realize how much noise he had allowed to fill his life. He checked the time and saw he still had a good half hour before he needed to return to the office. He looked around again, hoping perhaps she would appear somewhere nearby. It was silly to think she'd come at the same time he did, but he found himself scanning the path anyway. Then he heard footsteps approaching from the left side. He didn't look immediately. He didn't want to assume anything. But when the footsteps slowed near the bench, he turned his head. It was her. She stood there with the same calm expression, surprised to see him, but not shocked. She held a small paper bag in her hand, maybe lunch or a snack. Her hair moved gently in the wind. Her eyes carried that same peaceful light from the morning. "You're back," she said softly. "Yeah," he said, unsure how else to answer. "Just needed some air." She gave a small nod and sat down at the other end of the bench again, just like before. She opened the paper bag and took out a simple sandwich. Nothing fancy. She peeled off the wrapping slowly, like she enjoyed the process itself. He watched her for a moment, then looked away quickly when he realized he was staring. He didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. "Do you always come here during lunch?" he asked. "Not always," she said. "But today I felt like it." He wondered if she really felt like it, or if she, too, had thought about their earlier conversation. But he didn't ask. Some thoughts didn't need to be spoken aloud. She took a bite of her sandwich, chewed quietly, and wiped her fingers on a napkin. Everything she did seemed calm. That calmness made him relax too, as if her presence created space for others to breathe. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you usually come here?" "No," he said honestly. "Today was different." "Different isn't always bad," she replied gently. He nodded again. He wasn't sure why, but every time she said something, it made him think. Not in a heavy or stressful way, but in a clear, soft way, like someone cleaning dust off a window. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you asked this morning." She looked at him with quiet interest, not pushing him to continue, simply giving space for his words. "That question," he continued, "about doing something for myself. I didn't realize how long it's been." She finished her bite and lowered the sandwich onto her lap. Most people live like that. They forget themselves. "I guess I did," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "Why do you think that is?" He sighed and looked at the pond. "I don't know, maybe. I thought responsibilities came first. Work, bills, making sure everything is done. I never really stopped to think about myself." She nodded. "It's easy to forget you're human when life keeps pushing." He felt the truth of her words. He wondered how she saw these things so clearly. Maybe she had lived through something similar? Maybe she had learned it the hard way. "Can I ask you something?" he said, "Of course. You said something happened to you that made you rethink things. What was it?" She didn't answer right away. She glanced at the pond, watching a bird dip its beak into the water. Her expression softened, but her eyes held a distant memory. "It was a wake-up call," she said slowly. He waited. Not wanting to rush her, "I got so busy trying to do everything perfectly," she continued, "that I stopped listening to myself. One day my body reminded me." He didn't ask for details. He could hear enough in her tone. Something had happened that forced her to pause. Something that had pushed her to change direction. "The strange thing," she said quietly, "is that I didn't even notice how tired I was until I couldn't ignore it anymore." He swallowed. That sounds painful. It was, she admitted. But it also saved me. He looked at her, wondering how someone could speak about something painful with such softness. But maybe that was the point. She had already gone through the storm. She was standing on the other side now. That's why she seemed so calm. I didn't ask you that question to make you uncomfortable, she said gently. I asked because I saw something familiar in your face. That kind of tiredness. It's hard to hide. He felt something shift inside him, something softer than guilt, something closer to understanding. I appreciate it, he said quietly. No one really asks things like that, she smiled. Sometimes the simplest questions are the ones we need the most. He watched a leaf fall into the pond, making small ripples. The ripples grew outward, touching the edges of the water. He wondered if moments in life were like that small, simple things that made larger changes over time. You seem better now, she observed gently. More present. Do I? He asked. Double quotes, yes. This morning, you looked like you were miles away, even while sitting right here. He gave a small laugh. That sounds like me. She finished her sandwich and folded the paper neatly. She placed it back into the bag instead of leaving it behind. Everything she did had intention. What do you want from life? She asked suddenly. The question surprised him more than the one from the morning. It wasn't a deep or dramatic question. It was simple. But no one had asked him something like that in years. Most people asked about goals, success, plans, not life itself. I don't know, he said after thinking for a bit. I guess. I want peace. Not silence or escape, just peace. That's a good start, she said. What about you? He asked. She looked at the water again. I want to live without rushing, to feel every moment instead of running past them. He thought about that. It sounded so simple, but at the same time impossible. He admired the clarity in her words. You make it sound so easy, he said. It's not, she replied. But it's possible. They sat quietly for a moment. He noticed her hands steady, relaxed. He noticed her breathing slow, even. She lived the things she spoke about. She wasn't pretending to be calm. She had become calm through experience. He wished he could reach that place too, in the distance. A group of children ran across the field, shouting and laughing. The woman watched them with a soft smile. They don't think about responsibilities, she said with a light laugh. They just live. Just be nice, he said. It's not impossible for adults, she added. He turned to her. Do you think I can change? I mean, really change? Yes, she said without hesitation. Her confidence surprised him. You don't even know me, he said slowly. I know enough, she replied with a gentle shrug. I know you're trying. He hadn't expected that response. Trying. The word echoed in his mind. He had never thought of himself that way. He always thought he was just surviving, pushing through day after day. But maybe trying was the right word. Maybe he was doing his best, even when it didn't feel like it. You look like someone who carries a lot, she added. And people who carry a lot usually forget how strong they really are. He exhaled softly. He didn't know if she understood how much her words meant. She checked the time on her phone. My lunch break is almost over, he nodded. Mine too. She stood up and dusted off her hands. He followed her lead, standing as well. They faced the path that led back to the city streets. Will you come here again? He asked quietly. She looked at him with gentle eyes. Maybe. I come when I need to. So he didn't ask more. Even if we don't cross paths, she added. Remember what we talked about? I will, he said. She smiled one last time. Then walked down the path, her steps unhurried, her posture calm. He watched her until she disappeared around the curve. As he stood there alone, he realized something important. She hadn't given him advice. She hadn't told him how to fix his life. She had simply reminded him to look at himself, to breathe, to pause. She had reminded him he was allowed to live, not just survive. He walked back to his office with a steady pace. Not slow, not rushed, balanced. He felt the afternoon sun on his face, and for once, it felt warm in a comforting way. Inside, his coworkers were already returning from lunch. Some complained about work. Others talked about errands. He moved through the crowd quietly. But this time, he didn't feel swallowed by it. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and took a deep breath before beginning his tasks. His work didn't magically become easier, and responsibilities didn't disappear. But somehow, his chest didn't feel as tight. His mind wasn't spinning. He felt present. Every now and then, her words echoed in his thoughts. You're allowed to rest. You're trying. Peace is possible. He wasn't sure why she said those things, but he knew they mattered. As the afternoon passed, he found himself working with a clearer mind. He didn't force himself to finish everything at once. He took short breaks, stretched, drank water, and looked out the window. Small things he always ignored. When the workday ended, he packed his things slowly. Normally, he rushed out like everyone else, desperate to escape the noise of the office. But today he moved calmly. As he walked home, he wondered if he would see her again. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. But something told him this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Whatever happened next. He knew one thing for sure. His life had already begun to shift. Not in a dramatic, sudden way, but in a gentle, quiet way. A change that started with a simple question. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? He didn't have an answer yet, but he was ready to find one. The morning after the dinner at the community center felt strangely calm for him. He woke up earlier than usual, not because of meetings or urgent calls, but because his mind kept returning to the people he had met. He wasn't used to remembering details of strangers' lives, yet last night felt different. He remembered the way the old man with shaky hands thanked him not for money but for simply showing up. He remembered the teenager who shyly asked him how he survived the pressure of being known by everyone, but understood by almost no one. He even remembered the quiet woman who told him she'd been helping at the center for years because she wanted to give others the support she never found when she needed it. Most it stayed with him in a way he didn't expect. He sat at the edge of his bed and looked around his apartment, which was larger than the entire community center building. It looked spotless, expensive, and cold. Last night had shown him something warm, something human, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the memory of their laughter wash over him. Real laughter. Not the polite one he always heard at charity galas. He got ready slowly, almost forgetting he had a full schedule ahead. He kept thinking about the invitation card he had received, the one sent by someone he had never met. Someone who clearly didn't care about his reputation, his wealth, or the normal formalities people showed him. Instead, it was an invitation from someone who only wanted him to see the truth about lives he rarely crossed paths with. As he walked into his office later that morning, his assistant greeted him with a long list of calls and reminders. Usually, he would jump into work immediately, but he felt a strange hesitation. His assistant noticed it right away. It was the first time in years she had seen him arrive with a thoughtful expression, as if his mind was somewhere else completely. During the first meeting of the day, he found himself staring at the projections on the screen but hearing almost none of the words being spoken. His mind kept drifting back to the little girl who had handed him the handmade paper star at the center, telling him she hoped he would keep it because grown-ups forget to look up too often. He had smiled politely then, but it was only now, hours later, that her words truly hit him. When the meeting finally ended, he excused himself and stepped outside for fresh air. It was one of those quiet spaces on the rooftop of the building, high above the noisy city, isolated enough for him to think clearly. He leaned on the railing and watched the people below, all moving quickly, all chasing something. He wondered what he had been chasing all these years. Success, a name, respect, or simply a place where he didn't feel like he had to perform every second of every day. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from the coordinator of the center, thanking him again for coming. She also mentioned that the kids were still talking about him and were curious if he would ever come back. He read the message twice. People didn't talk to him this way. No one ever assumed he would return to a place unless his presence benefited a deal. He typed back a simple reply. one that surprised even him. "I'd like to visit again. Let me know when it's convenient." He stood there for a moment, feeling something shift inside him. Not a drastic change, but the beginning of one. He didn't yet know how far it would lead, but he knew it mattered. The day passed with meetings, paperwork, and discussions about future investments. But his attention remained divided. Every time someone spoke about numbers or projections, he found himself comparing it to the way people at the center spoke about each other. Their words weren't filled with ambition or strategies. They were filled with concern, kindness, and honesty. And he realized how rarely he heard any of that in his own world. Later that evening, instead of going to a formal dinner he had been invited to, he canceled the event and took a quiet drive across the city. He didn't know exactly where he was going at first, but eventually, his car slowed in front of a small street lined with simple apartment buildings. It was the same neighborhood where the people he met the night before lived. He stepped out of the car and just walked. No one paid special attention to him. No one recognized him. No one cared about his wealth, his status, or his influence. For once, he felt invisible. It was strangely comforting. He passed by a small bakery where a woman was pulling fresh bread out of the oven. The smell drifted into the air and reminded him of his childhood, of mornings when life was simpler and expectations weren't so heavy. He bought a piece of bread, and the woman behind the counter smiled at him the way people smile at strangers. They meant it, and nothing more. No hidden motives. He thanked her and continued walking. A few kids were playing outside, running around with worn-out shoes but wide smiles. He watched them for a moment, wondering when he had last seen children laugh this freely. One of the boys noticed him and he waved back, feeling strangely amused. As he walked further, he saw the community center again. Even though it was late, a few lights were still on inside. He stood outside the gate for a while, thinking of how a single unexpected invitation had brought him here, changed his routine, and made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. He didn't go inside, not this time. Instead, he walked back to his car with a quiet promise to return when his presence had a purpose, not just curiosity. The following days continued to challenge him in ways he didn't expect. On one hand, his business life demanded precision, discipline, and constant attention. On the other, he found himself checking messages from the center, thinking about the people he had met, and feeling a growing desire to understand more about their lives. One afternoon, he received another message, not an official invitation this time, but a note from one of the children he had spoken to. The message said they were planning a small event for the parents in the neighborhood and wondered if he would like to come. It wasn't written formally. It wasn't typed. It was a simple photo of a handwritten letter. He read it slowly, feeling a warmth spread across his chest. Children didn't ask people to attend events unless they truly wanted that person there. They had no hidden motives, no expectations of gain. They only invited people they liked, people they trusted. He replied with a yes. As the days passed, he prepared not like a billionaire going to a formal gathering, but like someone attending a personal moment in people's lives. He didn't bring a photographer. He didn't bring a team. He didn't bring gifts that would make people uncomfortable. He simply showed up with an open mind. The event was held outdoors, with simple chairs and a few colorful handmade decorations hanging between the trees. People had brought homemade food. Children ran around preparing their small performances. Everything felt raw, imperfect, and real. When he walked in, a few people looked surprised, but they welcomed him warmly. The children pulled him toward their group, telling him what they had planned. Their energy lifted him in ways he didn't expect. He found himself sitting among them, listening to them practice their lines, watching them stumble over words and then laugh about it during the event. He sat quietly in the back, watching the parents who clapped proudly for their children, watching neighbors share smiles, watching people enjoy a moment that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with connection. At one point, an elderly woman sat beside him and said softly, "You know, it doesn't matter how big your world is. If you don't have people who smile when you walk in, you're walking alone." He didn't know how to answer, but her words settled deep inside him. That night when he returned home, He didn't feel the usual exhaustion that came from a long day of business. Instead, he felt full of moments he couldn't buy. Full of memories he hadn't expected. Full of something that felt almost like belonging. Days later, he found himself thinking, not about profits and success, but about the people who had unknowingly opened a door for him. Not a door to charity or publicity, he had seen enough of that, but a door to understanding what it meant to be grounded, to be part of something human. He realized then that the unexpected invitation he received wasn't just an event. It was a turning point. It was a gentle pull toward a version of himself he had forgotten, a version that cared deeply, listened honestly, and felt things without trying to hide them behind numbers and deals. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't resist that pull. He let it lead him forward. The next week began quietly. But something inside him kept feeling different. Even as he sat in his office, surrounded by polished furniture, silent screens, and the faint hum of the city outside, his thoughts drifted back to the people he had met. He no longer felt the familiar weight of loneliness that often came with being at the top. Instead, there was this new sense of curiosity, something warm and persistent, pulling him away from the life he had always known. That morning, he stared at a document his team wanted him to approve. It was about restructuring a project that would affect a low-income area. Normally, he would have scanned through it, trusted the numbers and signed. But this time, he couldn't. He kept thinking about the kids who had run up to him, their hands sticky from homemade snacks, their smiles sincere. He kept thinking about the elderly woman who told him that walking alone meant nothing. If no one cared when he arrived, he pushed the papers aside and leaned back in his chair. His assistant, who had worked with him for years, entered with a fresh stack of files but paused when she saw the expression on his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not wrong, just thinking." She looked surprised. He was a man known for decisions that came fast and sharp. Seeing him hesitate felt unfamiliar, even to her. He thanked her and told her to hold the documents for later. She left the room without asking questions, but he knew she sensed the shift. Everyone close to him probably did, even if they didn't say it. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old notifications. There was nothing that interested him: business proposals, corporate invitations, and messages from people who only wanted something from him. Then his finger paused at one message. A picture the children had sent from the community center. They were decorating the place with leftover ribbons, trying to brighten up the rooms for an upcoming event. One kid had written under the photo, "We're making it nicer. Maybe one day you'll see it again." He stared at that message for a long time. It was simple, innocent, and honest. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of being welcome. Not because of who he was publicly, but simply because he existed, before he even realized it. He was already dialing the number of the coordinator. When she answered, he heard the busy background noises of children running, people talking, things being moved around. It made him smile without thinking. He asked if they needed help with anything. She paused for a moment, clearly surprised. Then she told him they were planning a small celebration for the kids at the end of the week, but were short on supplies. Nothing expensive, just paper, colors, and some snacks. He wrote down what she needed and promised he would arrange everything. She thanked him warmly, though her tone wasn't the kind that came from obligation. It was genuine gratitude. After the call, he felt an urge to go there himself. Not to send a team, not to send a donation, but to walk there like any other person, stand among them, see their world with his own eyes. Later that afternoon, he left his office quietly, telling his assistant he would finish the paperwork later. She nodded, though her expression hinted that she was wondering what could be more important than his usual responsibilities. He drove without telling anyone where he was going. When he arrived, the community center looked modest as always, but seeing it in daylight brought out details he hadn't noticed before: the cracks in the walls, the faded paint, the small playground with swings that squeaked when kids used them. But he also saw something else. People helping each
other
without asking anything in return. Parents carrying boxes. Teenagers decorating the entrance with strings of paper flowers. a group of children trying to tape a banner to the wall, only for it to fall again and again as they laughed. When he stepped out of his car, no one gasped. No one ran to shake his hand. They simply noticed him, nodded politely, and went back to their work. It was the most comforting welcome he had felt in a long time. The coordinator came over with a warm smile and told him they were glad he came. Then she handed him a box of supplies without hesitation, as if he was just another volunteer. "Can you help the kids with this?" she asked. He nodded, appreciating the normalcy in her voice. She didn't treat him like a billionaire, sure. She treated him like a person. He joined the children who were trying to make decorations. They showed him how to fold paper stars and how to attach them to thin strings. His first few attempts looked awful, and the kids teased him gently, laughing every time he made a mistake. He laughed with them, something he rarely did genuinely. One little boy climbed up on a chair, tagged to decorations, and nearly lost his balance. Without thinking, he stepped forward and helped steady him. The boy grinned and said, "Thanks. You're tall. That helps." The simplicity of the moment warmed him. As the hours passed, he found himself enjoying every part of the work, taping things, arranging chairs, blowing balloons until he ran out of breath, and the kids found his exhaustion hilarious. He didn't feel out of place. He didn't feel watched. He felt human. When the decorations were done, the coordinator handed everyone cups of juice. They sat outside on the steps of the building as the sun began to set. There wasn't any fancy lighting or music, just the soft glow of evening light and the steady chatter of people who had done something together. He sat beside the group, listening to their conversations. Parents talked about their hopes for their kids. Teenagers complained about school. Children giggled about jokes that made little sense but sounded funny anyway. No one talked about wealth, business, or influence. He realized how refreshing that was. Later that evening, the coordinator told him, "The kids really like you. You should come more often." He didn't know how to respond, because even though he had grown up surrounded by people, he had rarely heard such simple acceptance. He nodded and said softly, "I'd like to." When he finally drove home, the city lights felt different. The traffic didn't annoy him. The silence in his apartment didn't suffocate him. There was a lightness in his chest. Like the world had opened a small door he was allowed to step through. Over the next few days, he found himself visiting the center again. And again, not every day, but often enough that the children began to expect him. They would wave when they saw him walk in, run to show him what they were working on. He helped with small things, at first carrying boxes, setting up tables, repairing broken chairs, listening to people talk about their struggles. But slowly, he began helping in bigger ways too. He spoke with the coordinator about improving the center's learning space. He offered to support after-school programs without making a big announcement about it. He made sure everything was done quietly, respectfully, without turning it into a publicity event. One evening, he sat with a group of teenagers who were practicing for a small performance. They were nervous, stumbling over lines, forgetting their moves, and correcting each other with laughter. He watched them with a soft smile, remembering what it felt like to be young and full of dreams. They asked him what he was like when he was their age. He hesitated at first, but then shared stories he had never told anyone, not even his closest staff. Stories about being scared, about trying to prove himself, about struggling to make others see him as more than a resource. The teenagers listened quietly, and when he finished, one of them said, "You don't seem scary at all. You just seem like someone who never had time to be a kid." The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. As the days turned into weeks, he noticed something else. He was laughing more often, smiling more easily, sleeping better, worrying less about what people in the corporate world thought of him. One night, after spending the evening helping paint part of the center's wall, he sat in his car before driving home. His hands were still stained with paint, and he realized he didn't mind it at all. Those stains felt more meaningful than any signature he had placed on a business contract. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror and saw a version of himself that felt more genuine, less polished, and strangely more complete. He He wasn't sure where this new connection would lead him. But he knew one thing. The unexpected invitation he once received had quietly reshaped the way he saw the world and himself. He was no longer just the man people admired from afar. He was becoming someone who understood others closely, someone who listened more than he spoke, someone who cared without needing applause. And he wasn't going back. The evening after, he helped paint the wall at the community center stayed with him longer than he expected. He lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. He was the same person with the same responsibilities, the same businesses, the same city outside, but emotionally he felt completely different. It was as if someone had opened a window inside him and let the air flow through parts he had forgotten existed. For years, his life had been about numbers, meetings, large decisions, and trying to maintain a certain image. He had been moving like a machine without space to breathe or feel, but now everything had slowed down in a way that felt natural, not forced. He was learning to enjoy things again, learning to care without worrying how it looked, learning to listen without controlling everything. The next morning, he woke earlier than usual. Instead of rushing to prepare for the day, he sat beside his window with a warm drink in his hand and watched the sky lighten. The world outside was quiet, and for once, he didn't fill the silence with news or business reports. He simply breathed and allowed himself to feel grateful. Later that day, he returned to the community center. The children were practicing for their event. Teenagers were helping with decorations, and a group of parents were busy in the kitchen preparing snacks. He felt comfortable walking in, as though the place was slowly becoming another home for him. As he looked around, he noticed the girl who had invited him in the very beginning, the one who had given him that unexpected chance to reconnect with a life he had long ignored. She was helping a child tie ribbons onto a chair. Something about seeing her again made him pause. He had never forgotten her, even when he stayed busy with work. She had been the starting point of all the changes he was now experiencing. He approached her slowly. She turned and smiled politely, the same calm, warm expression she always had. He felt something gentle settle in his chest, something like peace mixed with gratitude. "You're here early," she said softly. "I wanted to help," he replied, "and I wanted to see how everything was coming along." She nodded, then pointed him toward a group of kids, struggling to put together a simple backdrop. He joined them, and for the next hour, he helped tape, fold, and set up decorations. Some kids joked about his crooked folds. Others teased him about how slow he was at tying knots. He laughed at himself more than they laughed at him. After a while, the girl joined him again. They stood side by side, watching the children rehearse a short dance. Their movements were awkward but enthusiastic, and the room was filled with bursts of laughter. "They've been practicing for weeks," she said quietly. "Even though they get tired, they don't give up." He nodded, watching the kids move in imperfect yet joyful rhythm. "They remind me what real effort looks like. Not the kind that's done for money or titles, but the kind that comes from the heart." She glanced at him with a thoughtful expression, as if she wanted to say something more, but chose to hold it back. That silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a shared understanding later in the day. The coordinator gathered everyone to go over the final details for the event. He watched how everyone worked together naturally, without competition or ego. People offered help without expecting anything in return. Every person mattered here, no matter how small their role was. As evening settled, he sat outside on a low wall, catching his breath after hours of preparation. The girl came and sat beside him. She held a cup of juice for herself and another for him. He took it with a grateful smile. "You've changed," she said gently. Not as a judgment, but as an observation. He let out a slow breath. "I feel like I'm finally waking up from a long sleep." "What do you mean?" she asked. "It's strange," he said. "I've achieved so many things in life, but I didn't realize how empty I felt until recently. Work kept me moving, but it never filled anything inside me. Coming here, meeting everyone, it feels real. It feels human." She looked at him, her expression soft. "Sometimes all a person needs is a place where they can be themselves, not the version the world expects." He nodded, appreciating the truth in her words. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For inviting me. For showing me something I didn't know I needed." She didn't respond with words. Instead, she gave him a small smile, warm enough to say she understood everything he didn't say out loud. The event took place the next day. Families gathered, children performed proudly, and laughter filled the air long before the celebration officially started. He helped arrange seats, welcomed people at the door, and made sure everything ran smoothly. No one treated him like a billionaire. No one whispered about his wealth. They saw him as a friend, a helper, someone who showed up because he wanted to, not because he needed attention. When the children began their performance, he stood at the back of the room with the coordinator and the girl who had invited him. Watching the kids dance with so much joy brought an unexpected warmth to his chest. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't responsibility. It was something softer, something he had not felt since he was young, pure happiness. After the performance, the kids rushed toward him, pulling him into their excitement. "Did you see us? Did we do good? Look, we didn't forget the steps this time." He laughed and told them they were incredible. Their small hands tugged on his sleeves, their bright eyes waiting for his approval. And for the first time, he felt like he was part of something that didn't require money or power, just presence. As the celebration continued, he stepped outside for a moment to breathe. The sky was glowing with soft evening light, and voices from inside echoed gently across the yard. The girl followed him out a moment later. "You look tired," she said. "A good kind of tired," he answered. "The kind that comes from doing something meaningful." She nodded slowly. "You know, the first time I invited you, I didn't think you would come." "I didn't think I would either," he said honestly. "Why did you?" she asked, her voice curious, not pushing. He paused, searching for the right words. "Because something in your voice felt true, and I think I was tired of living in a world where everything felt cold." She looked down at her hands before speaking. "I'm glad you came. Everyone here is glad." Felt something shift inside him again, not a dramatic change, but a quiet realization. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was part of this place. These people. Their stories. When the event ended, he stayed behind to help clean up. Chairs were stacked, decorations were carefully taken down, and the floor was swept.